The world's way of building can be a very frustrating experience. I don't know how many of you have been through building projects, either through your house or through your church, but at the end of the day, we've had to be very careful with our projects because we find that the normal experience is there's a lot of mistrust as we walk through the door the very first time because they've been through a very frustrating event in the past, and we want to make sure that we avoid those frustrating experiences. Ministries become weary, physically and mentally spent when we don't pay attention to things and do these things in God's way. And we want to emphasize that there should be a process that works for churches. Unfortunately, the process in the past has been, tell us what your budget is, we'll do what we can to keep it within 10 or 20% of that. They start the process, and at the end of it all, the church oftentimes feels excluded from what the process was all about. We want to make sure that we come up with something that's incorporating. So let's talk about that. The 20th century project delivery model, we believe, creates a lot of distrust, a lot of distance, a lot of dilution, certainly as we go through, and it can be disaster. And as it's portrayed here, it sometimes is a house of cards type of proposition. And we certainly want to avoid that because at the end of the day, if you're trying to build a building to fulfill the needs of a ministry and the ministries are destroyed by the very thing that you're seeking, it is a failure on everybody's part, and we've got to somehow avoid that. You'll find that the normal process too, where the architect is hired early on, and then at some point along the line, 3 or 4 months down the road, the engineers are incorporated into the project. Finally, the general contractor or the construction manager is brought into the process at the end of the drawing phase through a competitive bid or through some other process. And then finally, the trades get hired. And you'll see in the next slide that oftentimes the process stacks up like this, where you have the architect, you have the owner, and you have the general contractor, and you have these big brick walls dividing us. So if the plumber wants to ask a question, the plumber has to go up the food chain to the general contractor, back through the owner, back to the architect, and the owner oftentimes in these situations becomes the mediator between a warring architect and a warring general contractor. A very unpleasant situation for a church to find themselves.